Hi, everybody. Welcome to the March edition of Night Matters, our third Night Matters. We're very excited to have all of you. As you go through the presentation, if you can make sure to have all of your microphones muted, that would be fantastic. If you have any questions as we go through, we do have a Q&A session at the end scheduled. So leave your questions in the chat. Feel free to let us know where you're tuning in from as well. We're very curious. And so to this panel during International Women's Month, we decided we wanted to feature some of the amazing work trying to reach around the globe with the work that women in dark skies are doing. So this panel is going to be hosted by Georgia MacMillan, and I just want to read her biography to you so you can see just how amazing she is. So Georgia began studying light back in 2013, and as part of her undergrad in the outdoor education area, she is a founding member of the Friends of Mayo Dark Skies, and she became a community volunteer raising awareness of light pollution and working on the International Dark Sky Park application for the Mayo Dark Sky Park. She is a board member of the Dark Sky Ireland NGO, which seeks to restore and protect dark skies across the island of Ireland. Georgia is currently completing an employment-based PhD scholarship from the Irish Research Council, while also being employed by the National Parks and Wildlife in partnership with the University of Galway. Her research continues to explore darkness and dark skies in society, and she is currently conducting walking interviews at night in the Mayo Dark Sky Park and the wild, I'm going to mispronounce it probably, Levin National Park. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Georgia so she can facilitate our panel. Georgia, you're muted.
That's not a good start. Hey, thank you for a lovely introduction there, and thanks to yourself and Betty Meyer and the IDA for firstly for the invitation, and more importantly for having these lovely friends, I'd say at this stage, join the panel. So I'm delighted to be sharing this evening with Ada and with Anna and with Marnie. So between us, we were discussing before we came on here that we're covering 3 continents. So that's nice. And but not between us, but between Betty Meyer and Alison as well. So there's lots to talk about globally in terms of dark skies. So guys, just in terms of the format tonight, what we figured we'd do is firstly move around the panels and introduce each of our women in dark skies and maybe hear a little bit from them and their work and their backgrounds. And then we have a few points that we could discuss between us. And then we'd love to hear from everyone really, and to open up the floor and have a nice discussion and see where it goes. I think that's the nice thing about these kind of meetings, is they're quite informal. But from my point of view, thank you very much for having me, and I'm really looking forward to this evening. And first, if I may just introduce, I'm going to go in the order of Ada first, and we'll hear from Ada, and then Marnie, so that we're skipping from north to southern hemispheres, and then we'll go back up to Anna at the end, if that's okay. So so with that in mind, firstly, we're going to go to Ada, and I have to say that it's lovely for me because I've met all 3 speakers, and I met Ada in County Mayo, and I think we actually met at a conference in Scotland as well. And so she's in the Scottish borders, a beautiful part of the world in Scotland, and she works as a psychotherapist, non-profit practice, and she is, very importantly, the author of a book called Sark in the Dark, which is I suppose the results of her research on the Channel Islands island of Sark, where the community has been living for some time without artificial light. So her work on well-being and the community on this dark sky island, which is, I think, one of the first in the world to be accredited as a dark sky island. So I think perhaps with that in mind, we might go to Ada first, and just to hear a little bit more directly from her and her work, and then we can chat with the others. Okay, over to you, Ada.
Well, thanks very much for inviting me. It's lovely to be here. And I have to say, hearing Georgia's illustrious biography made me kind of think, oh my, you've been very busy, and lovely to hear the work you've been doing, Georgia. As Georgia said, we met a few years ago. I was in County Mayo. So I always meant to go back and visit again, but COVID got in the way, as it did with many plans, as it did with plans I had for myself in terms of some of my dark sky work. So as Georgia said, I'm a psychotherapist. I've been a psychotherapist for, more years than I care to remember, almost 30 now. But I suppose from a very young age, I had a relationship, I wouldn't say an attraction, I had a relationship with the dark skies, because my earliest memories are of being a very insomniac young child and living in a town not far away from Glasgow in Scotland, and having really, really horrible experiences of not being able to sleep, getting up at night, spending hours gazing out at the dark sky. So for me, my earliest memories of dark skies are around fear and frustration, not particularly liking being awake at night at all. And it was only later on in life that I began to appreciate the wonder and the awe that gazing at the night sky could give me. So yeah, my earliest memories were not great. But around about 2010, a very close friend of mine moved to one of the smallest Channel Islands. These are the islands between England and France. And visiting him, I was just completely blown away by the dark skies. There are no streetlights on Sark, and there are no cars allowed. So people have lived for generations with extremely dark skies. And Sark was Europe's first dark sky island, I guess, and there are more now. And I continued to visit Sark for many years. As Georgia said, I did research and I published a book. My main interest in dark skies has always been about the emotional impact. So I come with that as my primary interest. How gazing at dark skies and celestial objects, things that we see, how that affects our emotional side, how it affects us in healthy and sometimes not so healthy ways, and the benefits that we can reap from spending time out in the darkness. And over the years, I've been very interested in, there's been, I'm sure you've read, tons of research done in the fields of ecotherapy, environmental psychology, on the benefits of what I like to think of as green grounded nature, the positive impact of being out in nature, but very, very little mention of the sky in all of that, particularly the night sky. So I guess I saw a gap in the market. So the original Sark research was about trying to plug that gap, trying to bring the sky into the bigger picture. And that's been my passion, I guess, ever since. Where possible, I try to involve people in conversations about the sky. I work in the non-profit sector, but I also work for probably Scotland's largest university, and I am one of the sustainability champions within that university. And my main interest there is just trying to kind of get people thinking about lighting and how it's used at night in buildings. The campus is huge. It takes up a huge part of Edinburgh. So I've been involved in helping people look into how that can be shifted. I'm also very interested in children and introducing them to the sky at a very early age. And one of the things that I really, might sound a bit bizarre to say, I enjoyed about the COVID pandemic was the number of people who went out at night with children to walk where I was living just exploded. I hadn't ever seen that before in that place. But because everyone was feeling so frustrated and cooped up, people were taking children out for night walks, people who'd never done that with their children before. So that was a lovely spin-off, a lovely benefit, if you like, of COVID at a time when it was really difficult to think of any benefits. And as someone who's a fairly new grandmother, I'm also really interested in how I help educate and inform my own grandchildren now about the sky. So that's where my kind of interest is going. Children, continuing looking at the possibility of doing therapy at night. I was all set to run with some outdoor therapy, some evening therapy just before COVID. And once it became impossible to meet in groups or even one-to-one with people, that plan got shelved. But that's something I'm looking into right now. Doing outdoor psychotherapy at night, either with small groups, 3 or 4 people, or individually. But I have to say there does still seem to be quite a fear around amongst some people around not just individual therapy at night, but being with a stranger at night. So there's lots of barriers, and maybe that's something that might come up later on. Women at night, being outdoors, how they feel about that, safety, all of those things. So I don't really want to kind of say much more other than one tiny little extra bit that I'm become very interested in the last year or two, and that's moonbathing. So some of you maybe know about moonbathing, but the concept of moonbathing comes from the traditional Indian healing system of, I'll probably pronounce this wrong, Ayurveda. And the idea is that you go out at night and you expose yourself to the moon's light, and it doesn't have to be full moon, just any particular aspect of the moon, but to reap benefit, to reap physical and emotional benefit. It's supposed to be, in traditional medicine in India, it's regarded as healing for the whole biosystem, but also a wonderful way of reducing stress and anxiety. So where possible, I encourage my therapy clients to indulge in a bit of moonbathing, and I do myself too.
Thanks
Maybe
for that.
Paper. There's a little paper bubbling about that at the moment that's half written.
Oh, let's watch the space for that. Well, I have to say, just listening to your voice there, I'm being carried away. So I can imagine I was trying to transport myself to a dark place, and just talking to you, I imagine there's definitely something in it. I think for the psychotherapy possibilities in the dark. I think I would love to hear more about that. Can I ask you, before we move on to Marnie, can I just ask you, have you been back recently to Sark, and do you keep in contact with the people you did the research project with?
I haven't been back in the last few years, but I do keep in contact with some people, and they continue to step out into the dark. Rarely as part of organised groups or walks, more individually or with friends and family. But yeah, I'm still in contact with a few people there.
Yeah, nice. It's such a, it's such a spellbinding place, and reading your publication on that, and I would encourage anyone to look it up if you haven't seen it. And at least the IDA have also one of your papers on your experience there, haven't they, Ada? I think it's on the IDA website, so you can look that up, folks. But there's it's amazing just to I suppose think about a community that doesn't have public lighting and how they operate very well, and the kind of engagements that they have, and how you brought that to light, and to use that awful pun, but and I would love to go to the Isle of Sark. That's on my long list as well. So I think you've done well for their tourism attraction there, which is not to be sniffed at, I suppose, in dark sky tourism. That's what we're talking about too, which brings me probably to a link to Marnie. So we will come back to Ada. I've got lots of things written down, and thank you for that. It was beautiful. So Marnie, so what can we say? We have a very long, if we were really to do the proper introductions for these women, we'd be here all evening, we wouldn't hear from them. So Marnie has done so much work for Dark Skies in Australia, and in fact internationally. And I know from our perspective in Ireland, she has really influenced a lot of what we do here, with the development that she's done on the Australasian Dark Sky Alliance, through dark sky tourism and her initiatives there with Fred, her partner, to bring people all over the world for dark sky tourism initiatives. She has going to her just very brief bio here. She has 2 Dark Sky Defender Awards. As I mentioned, she's the co-founder of the Australasian Dark Sky Alliance, the first charity of its kind in Australia. She was also heavily involved in the application for the first International Dark Sky Park in Australia. She's been a finalist in the Small Business Awards for her board and tourism work on conserving the night sky environment. So very different, I suppose, work and background, but I would love to hear from you, and we will move to the Southern Hemisphere, which I always think is really cool, and that's one of the beauties that we can do these days. But Marnie, welcome. It's so lovely to see you, and I will switch my mic off so you can tell us more.
Thank you, Georgia. Thank you for the intro. And really, thank you, everyone, for spending some time and listening to us all. It's funny, Georgia, you just said that my background and work is probably quite different from Ada's, and we're going in a different direction. But the first thing I can say is that I'm about to take a tour group to Sark in September. So yes, as Georgia said, my background primarily is in tourism, and it was after I met my husband Fred Watson, who's the government astronomer for Australia, who was at the time working up at the National Telescope at Siding Spring. And for years he had been saying, oh, we really should be doing something to protect the observatory environment. And there's this wonderful idea that the IDA have that we could create a dark sky place around it. And it was actually after we'd gone on a tour to Italy and gone to the National Telescopes there behind Venice, and there was so much light that our idea of stargazing there had been impacted. So we took the bus back down to Venice, where we stayed the night, having not seen a single star. Came back to Australia, and I was out, as you mentioned, Ada, walking at night and looked up at the night skies, and I just thought, Australia has this absolutely wonderful asset. I mean, you can see the picture of Australia there with its light pollution. And we're not doing anything to protect it. No one's even considered it. It was just such a new and novel concept. And whilst Siding Spring Observatory does have guidelines and strict rules that the residents have to apply to live there, to comply with, it was really not happening anywhere else around Australia. So yes, my first step into dark skies and really understanding it was firsthand, I guess, with my father, who was very, very interested in camping, and he'd be standing out there watching the sunset and say, look, this is the ecliptic, you can see the planets coming up. And I just had that warm connection to the night right from the beginning. It was something that was really inspiring. It's my connection to my family. Even my grandfather, he would be out there at night standing, just looking up, and we'd hold hands as a little girl. And that was, and I guess that's one of the elements that I really want to share with people when I take people to dark skies, is that there's an element of there's a blanket that comes over us that we're not aware of. We don't have to judge people. We can't see what they look like. They could be fat, thin, skinny. They could be anything. And so that element of judgment actually allows us in some ways to get closer together. And I've seen tour groups literally do that. People who have never met each other have got together, stood in the dark, looked through a telescope. I've seen one lady look through a telescope, see Saturn for the first time, and burst into tears, saying, how can I be 75 and never have seen this before? And literally that group all stood around holding hands afterwards, looking at the night sky, even though they were complete strangers. So like Ada, I actually have also studied psychotherapy, and am very interested in the impacts of light at night and dark at night, and what we're doing to change our environment by introducing this artificial source of light at night, and where that will take us. Even just seeing how light impacts different cultures. So I spent a lot of time up in Sweden, where they've got polar nights and midsummer nights, and how does that compare with equatorial countries, and how are they impacted? So for me, I'm actually going back to study and to actually look at that in the next couple of years, and hopefully do some work on that, because I'm really excited to think about cultural connection to the night sky, not just from a First Nations perspective, but generally around the world. So ADSA was born off the back of the Australasian Dark Sky Alliance. Was born off the back of a conference, the first light pollution conference that was held in Australia up at Siding Spring Observatory. And it was amazing, actually. We had 100 delegates show up, and we realized that there are so many little actions happening across this country, with people trying to make dark sky places, or trying to speak to councils, or trying to adapt technology to work in their favour to preserve their environment. But they were doing it isolated, and they were doing it as a sole voice. And really, ADSA's primary mission is to talk about what's happening, to elevate those voices, to bring those people together, to make sure that that we're not isolated and doing things on our own and not recreating the wheel over and over. And it's grown in wonderful success. So possibly because of an experiment that we did, the Australasian Dark Sky Alliance was asked by the government, the Department of Environment, to help promote a set of guidelines that had come about on the National Light Pollution Guidelines on Marine Environment, specifically looking at turtles and how light impacts turtles and what could be done in these areas. And we were asked if we could help promote these guidelines. So with $5,000 and 6 weeks to go, and COVID just closing all our borders in Australia, we somehow or other managed to pull off a Guinness World Record attempt with 16,000 people signing up around the world to do the Globe at Night survey. So I saw Connie was online a minute ago. We had everybody around the world, 76 countries out there at night, looking up at the night sky and seeing how well they could see the sky, and putting it into the Globe at Night website, and then continuing with an online lesson about light pollution. And we broke the Guinness World Record for the most number of people contributing to an online lesson within a 24-hour period, which was really exciting and really, really scary, because I think we broke the internet a couple of times with people all trying to get on the same websites at the same times. But what was lovely about it, and I go back to Ada's comment at the beginning, was people were outside with their kids. And we had so many comments about, I live in this beautiful suburb. I've never stood in the backyard with my kids. My kids and I, we plan to do this again and again. Or I've now got a 6-year-old that says, "Mummy, turn off the outside light." So we've created a generation of champions for the night sky, which is really exciting. And then finally, the only other thing that I will mention is that we did go about, Connie says 6,700 observations in one night. Yay. Yeah, it was fantastic. And what was lovely was being involved in a global activity, which was really good. And the only other thing that ADSA has done, which I'm particularly proud of, is just reinforcing some good lighting standards in Australia. So we had started our own lighting certification process to Australian standards and to that National Light Pollution Guideline standards, which just endorses lights in 3 categories: human-friendly, night sky friendly, and then wildlife-friendly. And it's been a bit of a hit, with the local councils actually coming to us, looking at that database of certified lights and then implementing them. That then starts conversations around lighting management plans, which then starts conversations around dark sky places, which has just had an ongoing loop of interest, which is absolutely wonderful. And I'm very proud to say that Australia's gone from a very naive dark sky country to really kicking in and starting to do it nationally, which is really lovely. So I'm very proud to be a part of that. So thank you.
Well, congratulations, Molly. That is amazing. I mean, on all levels there with your work, I'm very excited to hear about what you're going to be doing research-wise. I think, especially around Sweden and the the day length cycles. That's a really interesting area, I think, for everyone involved in thinking about day and night cycles, and that's probably something we'll get to in a minute with Anna as we move on. But how do you find time? I'm just looking at all the different things that you've done between the travel and the research and ADSA and the past with the Globe at Night. Do you get out yourself to enjoy the night much now, or do you restrict it to certain times when you can go, maybe on the travel, or how do you balance it all? You are juggling a lot.
Do you know, I do get out almost every single night, and because I am absolutely blessed to live in probably one of the darkest parts of Sydney, and that's another little activity that I've got. I'm trying to make an urban night sky place right near where I live. So I can actually stand on my veranda every single night and look up at the night sky. And with Fred, we often just go out and have a look. So it's where we literally have one street light within a kilometre of us, and that's about it. I am lucky to be able to do what I'm passionate about, Georgia. So everything on that list isn't a chore, and I don't actually have to do too much else to keep me supported, and I don't really want to. I don't need to be a millionaire. I just want to be doing the things that are passionate and worthy and mean something to me. So yeah, it's
nice to say, if you love what you do, you don't work a day in your life, but sometimes that's harder, easier said than done. But in terms of the growth of, say, ADSA, have you got a good network now in terms of number of people that are on the ground? Because it's still a massive, even the area you're covering, the number of people.
Yeah, and look, and it's a volunteer organisation. And I think part of the difficulty that we do have is that none of us are paid. We don't have any, we don't really have any money in the bank. And yet we have a wide reach and a wide pool of people that want to do things with us. And in fact, I had a conversation with somebody in the lighting industry the other day saying, why aren't you doing this? And why aren't you doing that? And I literally said, give me $20,000 and I'll do it. We can't. I think that is the hardest thing. There's a there would be emails every day asking for requests and how to do this and how to do that, and even time to create resources to answer those takes. We're all in this boat. We all know what this is like, but I think that is the hardest part, is just trying to keep up with it and working on what's the most important, or making everybody feel that they can find, that there's a way of them getting the resources. That's the hardest thing. Yeah, just
see that is a challenge, right? Because you've done the hard work in terms of getting people to ask those questions, but now you have to serve. So no, fair play to you. That's great to hear.
Thanks, Julia.
Thank you, Marnie. Okay, we're moving back up now to Scotland. So there's a common theme here, and we're going to meet Anna Levin. So Anna is the author behind one of the most remarkable books, really, on a personal account, Incandescent, We Need to Talk About Light. So here she explored the impact of excess artificial light personally and on nature, and the consequences on nature and the built environment and human health and well-being. So we've got some similarities with the previous speakers, with the work that's going on, and with something that we all experience every day, and some of the arguments that we, I suppose, try and demonstrate as we're advocating for dark skies. So Anna is a long-standing passion, has a long-standing passion for aquatic mammals. She's currently writing about the effect of light pollution on the watery environment. So I'm looking forward to hearing about that. And this is from her local river to the world's oceans. And she has recently moved back to her homeland of Scotland. So with that, again, welcome, Anna, and delighted to see you too. So I'll hand over to you and we'll hear more.
Thank you, Georgia, and lovely to see you all again, and thanks to everyone who's come from all over the world. Yeah, I'm a writer and journalist, and I specialise in wildlife and environmental issues, and I've been doing so for a good 20 years focused on natural history and people's connections to the natural world and experiences of it. And I came into light kind of sideways through an interest in the changes in artificial light and how that was impacting on human health. And I got very embroiled in the politics and the ideology and the legislation and the changing regulation around light. And I felt like I was in a completely different planet from my wildlife world that I'd been working in. And it was actually, I was at a conference which Ada was speaking at in Dumfries and Galloway way back in 2017, when I found myself having breakfast with a marine biologist. And I sort of said, I don't expect to see you here. And he said, no, light is a huge issue for the marine environment and for the natural world. And at that conference, it sort of hit me what, of course, I should have realized all along, that all these things I'd been learning about how light impacts on human physiology. You know, we share this stuff with the rest of the natural world. We've all got eyes and nervous systems and endocrine systems and hormones and circadian rhythms, and anything that's affecting us is, of course, affecting other creatures that, and maybe more so, that perceive light in very different ways. And I began to think completely differently about how light is a human construct. You know, what we even call light is that little sliver of an electromagnetic spectrum that we perceive through our eyes. You know, other creatures don't even have eyes. Other creatures have very different eyes. And so when you come to regulating or legislating or changing light, you know, whose version of light do you take into account, and what impact does that have? And I learnt that, you know, light is affecting every living thing on Earth, and the changes in artificial light in quality and in quantity that have been so enormous during my lifetime. And that affects, you know, on a cellular level, it affects different species, and it affects all the interactions between species. And I'm thinking, you know, started to really realize that, you know, life is run by this great celestial clockwork of light and dark and seasons and everything turning, and just how fundamentally light pollution is messing with that. So it all came full circle, and I find it interesting looking back at my life, especially listening to Ada and Marnie's stories about, I mean, all my childhood I was scared of the dark. Actually, most of my adult life as well, I have to confess, I was really scared of the dark. And I remember moving to Edinburgh for the first time, and there was this big street light on my flat, just outside my flat, just outside my bedroom window. And my reaction then was, oh, thank goodness, I'm never going to have to deal with darkness. It will never be dark here. I thought that was wonderful. And now I've come completely full circle the other way, that I actually seek out darkness like a vital nutrient. You know, I crave it. If we're going on holiday, that's the absolute highest priority. What I want is to be able to step outside the door and see darkness, as well as the beauty of the night sky and the stars and the moonlight. And I'd never heard of moonbathing, but I was writing, funnily enough, just this week about something about moonlight. And you know, if I scan my life and I look back over my life's journeys, I can see the moonlit bits like really shining. I remember Girl Guide Camp when I was little, just seeing these fields and stone walls in Lancashire just bathed in moonlight, and an incredible walk on the Isle of Coll, which is one of the dark sky areas. And yes, just the shining sea and the shining rocks. And yeah, I've definitely into moonbathing without knowing that was a thing. So and starry sky times have been really, really important to me in my life. But I did know darkness as a child, because I lived in a village where there was a few street lights, but they ended at the end of the road, and the village station was a couple of miles from that road, so you had to walk in real darkness. And so light was significant, moonlight was significant, and in a way that it isn't in a city life. And I've got a little sister that grew up quite a lot later than me in London and holidayed in the city. And when she came to visit us for the first time in Scotland, she had never seen darkness. She was looking out the car. We drove across from Berwick to East Lothian, and she had never known that was a thing. And that shocked me and made me realize how many children in the world today must be growing up, not just not knowing the stars and the Milky Way, but not actually knowing darkness as a texture, as a phenomenon, and how important that is. So yeah, now I'm very interested in people's perceptions of light and dark, how much is needed, how you feel about it. But I'm also very focused on how, on the growing dark sky movement, which is huge, and we've got people here from all over the world, but also how little is known about that in some really mainstream environmental circles, and people with huge concern for the world, for the oceans, for the planet, have no idea how much damage excess artificial light is causing. So my interest is at the moment in converting environmentalists, really, and sort of bringing this dark sky world and making those connections that I had made a wee while ago. Thank you.
Thanks, you too, Anna. It's very interesting that so just listen to a couple of you saying about being scared of the dark in the past, maybe, and how that has changed. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with us being dark sky advocates and still being scared of the dark. But it's a natural darkness, I think we're talking about, as opposed to that sort of artificial contrast darkness that you experience maybe when there's too much light. But it's very, I think people are often surprised when, you know, somebody who's advocating for dark skies might admit to being afraid of the dark. And, you know, there's so many things that go on in our heads about, you know, stories or psychological things that we've seen or heard that affect us, perhaps whether we're alone or with others, that change that experience. And again, you've touched on, you know, how many children have missed out on darkness, or maybe might never experience natural darkness. I think, you know, that's something in the IDA's, I suppose, mission, that, you know, we're trying to protect this for future generations, and future generations might just have missed it completely. So it just reinforces for me how important it is. And thank you very much, Anna. And I'm a real admirer, as you know, of your work. So yeah, appreciate that. So folks, we had a discussion by email over the last few days, and one of the questions that I suppose we discussed between us is, you know, what is it about dark skies? This is women in dark skies tonight. So on that theme, you know, what is it about dark skies that attracts so many women, and what do women bring to it? And obviously, I'm not excluding our male participants here tonight. You know, what do you think the same, or is this just our perception maybe? But it does seem quite prevalent that certainly in IDA regions, that they are either women-led, or there's you know, certain initiatives that seem to be dark skies and women-led. And I suppose if I could throw that open to our panel, what do you think about that in terms of what is it about dark skies and women? And I'll throw it open, see who. Ada, you're on mute there, Ada, following my mad example.
Hi, is that okay?
That's it.
Okay, good. I'm just reminded of when I was doing the interviews on Sark back in 2014, 15, I noticed that when I asked the local community who wanted to be interviewed, the first rush of people, everyone wanted to talk about the dark skies on Sark, but the first rush of people were all women. And then the men gradually kind of crept along. But the first rush were women. And I remember speaking to one woman and asking her, you know, why do you think so many women on Sark seem really interested in the night sky, the dark sky? And she laughed and she said, this was a very elderly woman, she was about late 80s, early 90s. And she said, well, Ada, you know, you must know that we women are so busy, and, you know, we're so busy in the house, we've got so much to do, that for many women on Sark, walking outside at night, even for 5 minutes, standing outside the house for 5 minutes was an escape from domesticity. It was an escape from the family. It was the bit of peace and quiet that you'd been waiting for all day.
Lovely.
And I don't want to kind of universalize that and say that's the only reason, but I've just always remembered that comment. And I think for me, there is something about, and again, I don't want to stereotype or generalize too much, but, you know, women maybe who have busy lives, people who are mothers or just have very full-on jobs, taking a little bit of time up on their own, outside the home, outside the house. So that's maybe part of the sky story about it. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's interesting. What do you think, Mani? she's not.
I couldn't unmute myself. I think I'll just leave it off.
Yeah.
I'm not sure why women are drawn to it, but I will make this observation that when I've done radio interviews, and it's amazing, you know, you get on, the radio gives you 10 minutes thinking it's going to be not that big a story, and then you end up doing half an hour because there's so many people calling in with stories about their night sky experiences or questions around the activities, etc. And it grows to 30 minutes. But the only time I ever get questions about safety and security, which I'm sure, you know, is part of this as well, is they come from men. So I'm really curious to know why men are asking questions about women's safety in lit environments and not women. It's not been the women that have raised it. And so I would probably agree with Ada that there's a sense of women finding comfort or a moment of, you know, escape, or maybe some women have been up at night with their children and looked out the window. I don't know. I think there is a sense of community that the Dark Skies has created. So, you know, looking at this panel tonight, I've met all of you at the conference and felt very comfortable to approach you and speak with you. So I don't know, maybe we've generated that interest. Maybe it's been self-perpetuating, people like Connie that have worked really hard to advocate for Dark Skies. At one stage, you know, the board and and many of the committees with IDA were strongly women based. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's an interesting connection.
I think that word connection, I wrote it down when you were talking earlier about you know, dark skies and the connection, and we use that a lot when we're looking at the sky and thinking of people perhaps miles away and families, and especially during the pandemic when people couldn't I suppose see their loved ones. And maybe that is I suppose a slightly more female thing to do when we think it's more I would do it quite a bit, is, you know, looking at the stars and thinking of somebody that's far away. So I don't know, but the connection is what I'm getting at, I suppose, and you've hit on it there as well in terms of the social connection as well as the dark skies. I just saw a comment there. Now I will leave Betty Meyer and Alison to go to the comments, but there's one from Deborah Moore in here, and she says, I'll just read this out if you didn't see it. I'm afraid I know the answer. This is for why women in dark skies. At least in Houston, too many women work in fields where they think they will be penalized if they're outspoken about lighting. So it kind of touches maybe upon the question you had, Marnie, with, you know, why men perhaps raise women's concerns about safety. She says, we have support from men in astronomy, but I've been told outright that they can't be vocal about it. The men helping all seem to be retired. Okay, that's interesting. Anna, have you any other thoughts? And don't feel I'm kind of doing this in rotation at the minute, but don't feel that that's a structure. So please chip in if any of you have any other comments.
Only that there's something very liberating and maybe a sense of reclaiming the night going on at the moment. And I know that's the language that, you know, when they do the big sponsored moonwalks for breast cancer and things, and people are going out at night together, and maybe something about sorry, excuse my dog barking. Something about, you know, sharing the night sky and the night experience. When you share that with other people, it's you know, that it's sort of reclaiming that space and a sense of feeling comfortable out in the dark that maybe a lot of women wouldn't on their own.
Well, then on that point, can we flip it back and perhaps bring Marnie's point in as well? You know, what about women on their own and lighting, and the point that maybe more men tend to raise that? Would you have any thoughts or comments about that point and security? Let's perhaps jump to that point.
Yeah, it comes up all the time when I'm talking to people about the need for less light, and, you know, there's always somebody that says, but for women's safety we need more light. And, you know, I always say, well, I think for women's safety we need better light in some areas. That doesn't necessarily mean more light. And, you know, a lot of the lighting we've got at the moment, certainly in my area in central Scotland, you've got, you know, LED streetlights with very bright pools of light and then very black bits in between. And so you're going from light to dark, which is, you know, an issue for elderly people's eyes, but it's also an issue for safety and perceptions of safety, because you've got these dark bits and light bits, and, you know, very soft, gentle, consistent light is, you know, is actually a more comfortable thing to be out in at night. And having lit routes in certain areas and certain parks that's subtly done is something I'm certainly supportive of. But to have bits where you don't need light everywhere, and you know, taking away excess light is the big issue for me.
And perhaps maybe a stronger voice from women to say what type of light, or engage in the type of light that we need. Sorry, Marnie, I think you were going to say.
No, I was just going to ask if we could do a quick, you know, poll just to see. I mean, it's obviously prejudice, but we've got all these women here, you know, how many of us have felt unsafe or feel unsafe? And maybe, you know, maybe as dark sky advocates, we feel, you know, less concerned about it. But I have only ever felt unsafe in really lit areas. So I can walk down a completely dark street at night and not have any concerns, because I know that my other senses, such as, you know, my hearing, or that I don't know, that there's a sense of nothing being hidden from me. You know, I could walk down an area and not be concerned in that. But my natural tendency is to worry if it's really lit. Well, then what's happened here?
Well,
you know, why?
I think I've told you this before, but my mother, who's now 92, who's from rural Mayo in Ireland, moved to London in the 1940s, and she said she was never afraid of the dark until she moved to the bright lights of London, and I think that's kind of illustrating that point as well, that, you know, the light that maybe we think is necessary, or other people think is necessary, doesn't do the job that they expect it to. Ada, I don't know if you have any.
Yeah, a couple of things that were popping up to my mind. One is just to say that last year I moved from a semi-rural town that was about 12 miles south of Edinburgh to a much more rural area. So now I live in a house where the nearest street light is, I don't even know how far away. I'm close to main road, but there are no lights, no street lights at all on the main road. And I have never felt safer walking in the dark than I do here. When I lived in Edinburgh for many years, and I also lived in Glasgow for a long time, and I was frequently frightened being out at night, walking in what were, you know, very well lit, busy streets. And anytime I've, you know, been approached and felt unsafe, it was always in cities. It was never in rural areas, dark areas. So yeah, I would agree, you know, with what Marnie was saying there. But I'm also reminded of earlier on today, there was an article in the Guardian newspaper. Well, it was online. I've got their app online. Sorry, don't know what that was. Someone jumping in. And the article was about a woman who likes to run. And she was talking about how once it gets dark, once it gets into winter, she stops running at night because she's too frightened of being in the dark. And she wanted to be able to run in the winter, in the nighttime. So the article was basically about what she could do to help herself feel safe. And there was stuff about, you know, she could go to self-defense class. There were various suggestions she could run as part of a group rather than running alone. But her bottom line was she wanted to run alone in the dark. And she didn't want to run in well-lit places. She wanted to run in, I think it's Yorkshire, rural Yorkshire or somewhere like that. She didn't want to run in a town or a city. So again, maybe, yeah, reinforcing that idea that a lot of women, you know, don't necessarily want to be in well-lit areas or feel safe in well-lit areas all of the time. Maybe
there's an interesting study. Sorry, Georgia. There was an interesting study done through Arup, and there's been a few done, but it's one of the only ones I can really cite. And it was done in Australia with a lighting company, talking to women, going into parks, going into areas, and asking them, "Do you feel safe? Do you not feel safe?" And overwhelmingly, it seemed that women did feel happier in less brightly lit environments, and their work is actually going towards creating park areas, particularly in urban areas, that have a variety of lights, so that you have low lit, that you can have areas that you can sit and look at the stars, that there are areas that you can play football, but as you get into the park, it actually gets dimmer and darker, and so that you can have this sort of differing experience rather than just a broad, a standard lighting throughout. But I thought it was really interesting that, I think it was several thousand women were interviewed, and generally they all said the same thing, that so hopefully with that study that there'll be a bit of change.
Yeah, and that's what we need, is some studies like that are actually taking the voices of the users. And quite often I find that people who are calling for light are not the ones that are going out at night. They'll say, oh, that dark space, it needs to be lit, but they probably would never use it either way, whether it's light or lit or not. So I think, hanging on to our peripheral vision for me is really important as a woman who walks alone in the dark a lot. And, I'd rather have my peripheral vision than tunnel vision, which is what happens when I'm exposed and I can see nothing either side of me except what's straight ahead. Folks, I'm just conscious about the time, and I don't want to get told off by Alison and Betty Maya, but how are we doing, guys? Are we okay for a few minutes, Betty Maya or Alison?
Hi. Yeah, you guys are good. We just had some questions about if you could link your various websites so people can learn more about you. That would be fantastic. And I will save them and send them out as a mailing, in the mailing with the recording as well.
Okay.
So anything you would like us to share, go ahead.
We can pop those in the chat. There was a couple of comments. I haven't read them all, but I just saw one word there: insecurity lighting. I forget who said it, but I think that's very well put in this case. Insecurity lighting. Okay, I'm going to throw one other question out to our panel here, and there's so much we could talk, so we probably should have had 2 hours, Alison. I'm joking, you don't want to hear from me for 2 hours. So I suppose, what would we do differently if we could start this dark sky journey again? What would you do differently? So let's go, Anna. Having had no time to think about it and put you on the spot.
What would I do differently personally, or
on your job? So let's say somebody is just getting into the dark sky movement, and you want to give them some advice to make change, or to follow a similar sort of journey. But what would you have done differently?
I suppose I would have just started so much earlier to appreciate, not just the night sky, but the darkness. As I say, I went from sort of really trying to avoid the dark and being quite scared of the dark to just actually taking the time to treasure it and experience it, and just the peace of it and the balm of it. So I would just say, don't put the light on so fast. If you're going into, even sometimes in the evening, just sit with the light off. Just be a while in the dark, go out in the dark, and just take that time. I think we so often go outside. I've just been up in the Highlands for a week, actually, on a writing retreat, which was glorious, but I was so expecting to just treasure that darkness. And everyone who walked out of the lovely cottage we were staying in immediately reached for their phones and those very bright, intense torches that people have on their mobiles, and within a step of going outside the door. And I just kept saying to everybody, just give it time, your eyes will adjust. And I think that's something people don't realize, that time is so necessary from going to a bright space to a dark space, and take that time and enjoy it. And I wish I'd just started doing that earlier in my life, because it's so important. And now it feels so rare. Where I live, we've got quite light polluted skies, ironically, because I'm not in a city, but we've got a big oil refinery. That with a lot of sky glow, but the back of the house, even I can see the main constellations. And just going out to get the washing in when I've left it out at night, and not putting the outside light on, I can see it enough to see it, and just taking that step and waiting before you light and overlay it and enjoying it.
That's really good advice. No, thank you. Ada, what would you have done differently?
I guess for me, thinking back many years ago when I first did my therapy training, there was a lot of concentration on being in a contained room, an inside space during daylight hours with one person, and that was how you did therapy. And it was a long, long time before I gave myself permission to do any therapy outdoors in daylight, because it felt radical and not quite ethical. And then gradually I began to realize that not only could you do it in daylight if the person was willing, but you could consider doing it at night. And I guess I wished I'd been more cutting edge at a much younger age and pushed the boundaries further back then and threw out these ideas, so that maybe a lot more people would be doing things like that now. Because it's still, even though people do, you know, walking therapy, it's walking psychotherapy and outdoor psychotherapy, all that stuff, it's extremely rare for anyone to do anything during the nighttime hours. And I just think it would be wonderful to try it. So I guess to my younger self, I'd be saying, you know, why weren't you well, give myself a break. I didn't think it was possible. I didn't think it was allowed at that point. And I also wish, you know, I've traveled quite a bit, but I also wish that some of the countries I'd visited, I'd seen them at night. Because some of them did feel quite dangerous to walk around at night. I'm thinking to maybe some of the African countries, some of the Eastern European countries, they just didn't feel safe to walk alone in at night, especially in areas, you know, unfamiliar places. I wish I'd been braver. I wish I'd seen more night skies in other countries, but there's still time.
Well, what you have done, and just to coin your phrase, that missing sky factor that you've introduced to so many. So thank you for that. It's, applying that to other places, not just dark sky islands, I think is a good mantra to have. Marnie, what would you have done differently if you were starting your journey again?
So I interpreted your question slightly differently. But if the dark sky journey, not just my dark sky journey, but the dark sky journey was different, and if I could wave a magic wand and travel back through time or do all of those things, I truly think that we missed an opportunity with astronomy. So for years, astronomers have known about light pollution. You know, observatories have moved from place to place, further and further, more remote areas, and now up in space just to get away from light pollution. And many astronomers were very passive with the way that they approached this. And they were seeing something that was changing dramatically in the world. And very few did anything about it. And I'm only really glad that, you know, Tim and the guys that started IDA really raised their voice. But, you know, I ask my husband Fred, and he'll say, you know, for 40 years I've been talking about light pollution, but we never, you know, they didn't get into the right people's ears. They didn't get into the policymakers' ears or discuss further implications. And I guess now, as we see the impacts ranging into wildlife and bird life and marine life and, you know, all the rest of it, we're starting to make progress. But if I had my magic wand and could travel back, I would definitely be pushing the astronomers to be stronger voices and to advocate more. But if I had my journey again, I don't think I would do terribly much more differently. I think it would be lovely to have done it earlier, but I think we just have to start from where we are, and we're all doing amazing things, and the community is very passionate, and I think we should all be patting ourselves on the back for taking it as far as we have. So yeah, that's
a nice thought. Yeah, I agree with you on the astronomy, though. I mean, you know, I want to blame Fred too, but but no, it's very interesting. But I think also the development of technology with lighting was so exciting that, you know, the thought of perhaps introducing that being an issue wasn't the right time. So maybe, you know, we've come around, and, you know, our needs have changed, and maybe now is the right time. Who knows? Right, I'm going to bring Betty Meyer and Alison. Yes, thank you, ladies, for being so patient. And I know you've been dealing with a lot of queries. There's loads of messages there. So I'm going to hand over to you guys to bring them in. And thank you to all the panelists for great interaction there and chat. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, well, thank you so much, Georgia and Ada and Anna and Marnie. I'm so sorry. Marnie, was great to hear from all of you. And we are at the top of the hour, so unfortunately we're going to have to close out. Next time we're going to do a 24-hour Women in Dark Skies and just have it like the conference, just go all night long, because we definitely could listen to you guys for many more hours. But a huge thank you for sharing your time with us today. If you do like talks like this, you like being involved in the dark sky community, I would like to extend an invitation to everyone here who hasn't yet to join IDA's Advocate Network. There's information about it in that link that I just popped in the chat. And then I will also pop in, we ask that you take a short 101 video training that really introduces you to IDA, all the work that we do, and kind of the basics of dark skies. So there is that link for that training as well. And if you are an advocate and haven't yet thought about starting a chapter or becoming a delegate, please think about that as well. There's information in that link. And International Dark Sky Week is coming up as well. So check out all of our info at idsw.darksky.org. And with that, I guess I will let Allison and Georgia close us out.
All right, Georgia, do you have any final thoughts?
Just to say thank you for having me, and just great to catch up with Ada and with Anna and with Marnie and yourselves. So thank you all. It's nice to be on this. So I will look forward to joining again as a participant. Thank you, guys.
All right, so as we finish out, just a quick plug, you will be receiving an invitation for the April Night Matters, and it will be featuring Travis Longcore and some of the work in the environmental area. So we will be continuing our series. And I want to thank our panelists for coming here. Your diversity of how you got into dark skies is exactly why, not to be super punny, but why the night matters, right? Like we've all have reasons why the night resonates with us. So thank you all for being here. You are simply amazing. And this was an amazing panel to watch as well. So thank you. And thank you for everybody for coming to watch it as well. And we're going to end now, unless last thoughts? Going once, going twice? All right.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all. Bye bye.